Welcome to Confessions of a Frustrated Game Master. I am Robert, the narrator, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Confessions. Well, this episode of Confessions, I'm going to tell you how to successfully run a mystery or a conspiracy in your game, your tabletop role-playing game. As we all know, that is a difficult trick to pull off because sometimes you'll have a circumstance where your players don't like that style of game. They don't like solving mysteries and engaging with clues. They may forget clues that they have found, or may just not be good at putting the clues together and remembering them. So all of those things prevent game masters from running successful mysteries or conspiracies in their games. Now, I'm pretty sure that there are a ton of tips and tricks out there on how to successfully do that. Pretty sure you could find some videos. This video is just going to involve what I did for the mini campaign that I ran for my tabletop role-playing game, Peace the RPG. Weeks ago, and that's all I'm going to talk about is the method that I use. So let's get started. So the biggest issue, as I said, with running mysteries or conspiracies in your game is the fact that players may not like that style of game. They may miss clues, they may misread clues, or they may just totally forget about the fact that they uncovered clues in previous sessions. So all of that leads to game masters not being able to successfully pull off a mystery or conspiracy at their table. And if you have your game set up in such a fashion that missing clues will prevent the adventure from moving forward, that really can kill a campaign or an adventure or a session. And that is really some of the things that game masters struggle with running mysteries or conspiracies at their table. So what I did with my mini campaign, the first thing I did was I decided that uncovering the clues to the conspiracy in my mini campaign, whether or not the players uncovered them, would not prevent the adventure from moving forward. And I'll tell you what I mean. So the mini campaign that I ran for my game Peace the RPG a few weeks ago were actually two adventures smushed together. And all of these events were going to happen regardless of whether or not the player characters sussed out the fact that there was a conspiracy going on. So this was the structure of the mini campaign. The player characters started as caravan guards. The caravan was threatened by a stampede of large, powerful mammals, and these mammals were stampeding and acting very unusual because of preparations that were being made for a ritual nearby. So that was the first scene or conflict, if you will. The player characters had to safeguard the caravan from a huge stampede of powerful mammals. The second conflict or encounter was when the caravan finally reached the small town that it was traveling to. The player characters would have to rescue two townsmen from predators, wild animals that were acting very strangely, again being driven by the preparations for an evil ritual that was occurring near the town. After figuring out that there were strangers near the town, the next conflict or scene were the player characters traveling to the location where this evil ritual was going to be performed, and dealing with that. So that pretty much was the first half of the adventure, dealing with the stampeding creatures, dealing with the predators who attacked two townsmen, and finally thwarting the ritual at a location called the Devil's Horns. So all of these things were going to happen, and as you can tell, there were no clues needed for the adventure to move forward. Either the player characters were going to deal with the stampede that was going to crush the caravan that they were guarding. Either they were going to rescue the townsmen who were being attacked by several wild animals, or they were not. And finally, they were either going to go to this location called the Devil's Horns and thwart the ritual that was causing all of the wildlife in the area to act very strangely, or they weren't. So no clues, figuring out clues, sussing them out, remembering the clues that they have sussed out were required for this adventure to move forward. So what I like to say is the point of the adventure is not necessarily solving the conspiracy, but the adventure was structured so that the player characters would be driven to thwart the ramifications of the conspiracy. They were dealing with the fallout of the conspiracy. That was the point of the adventure and how the adventure was structured, not figuring out clues or figuring out who was at the head of the conspiracy. So that is going to be my biggest tip to you. If you can structure your conspiracy so that the point of the adventure is not to figure out who is the head of the conspiracy, but just simply driving the players to deal with the fallout of the conspiracy, that will make your conspiracy that much easier to deal with and be a lot more successful. So what was going on in this conspiracy that the player characters had to deal with when they had to thwart this evil ritual that was going to happen at this location called the Devil's Horns? Well, the head of the conspiracy was an evil wizard named Velthrum. Velthrum lived in a city called Fortress, and he served a lord in this city of Fortress. And what Velthrum wanted to do was to summon a powerful demon into the world. And that summoning required two things: two separate rituals, one that needed to be performed at the Devil's Horns, and another one that had to be performed in another location in the world. And this second ritual had to be a sacrificial ritual where a child who was born from parents from two different statuses in the world, that was the sacrifice that had to be made. So the child that had to be sacrificed at the second ritual had to be a child born from a parent of high birth, from nobility, and a parent of low birth from the peasantry, in order for the ritual to work. So the heart of the conspiracy was this second ritual is really where you dig into the conspiracy. What Velthrum did was he convinced another servant, a peasant servant of the Lord, to court the Lord's daughter, his noble daughter, and he actually used a love potion to make sure that the peasant servant and his Lord's daughter would fall in love. They had a child, and that allowed the conspiracy to move forward. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, well, Robert, why run a conspiracy if you can successfully get through the adventure without the player characters having to suss out the conspiracy? I'll tell you why. Because the way that the conspiracy was structured is that if the player characters were going to be the heroes that the game, the default setting of the game requires them to be, then the heroes would wind up having to protect the noble woman who was the daughter of the Velthrum's lord, and bringing her back to home to make sure that she reached her home successfully. So ultimately, the player characters were going to meet or come across this evil wizard once they delivered the noble daughter home. And whether or not they sussed out the conspiracy was dependent on, whether or not they sussed out this conspiracy would dictate whether or not Velthrum, the evil wizard that they finally meet at the end of the adventure, would have a tactical advantage. Because if they take the noble daughter back home, if they have sussed out that Velthrum is the head of this conspiracy, then they will know who he is, and he will not necessarily know who the player characters were, or that the player characters had thwarted Velthrum's plans. So why the conspiracy is important, or what effect the conspiracy has on the game, is if the players suss out the conspiracy and who Velthrum is, they'll have a tactical advantage when they finally meet him. If they don't suss out who Velthrum is, they can get to the end of the adventure, because remember what I said, the point of the point of the adventure, what drives the adventure, is not the players figuring out who the head of the conspiracy is, but just dealing with the fallout of the conspiracy. So if they get to the end of the adventure and they haven't figured out who Velthrum is and that he is the head of the conspiracy, Velthrum has the advantage. He can strike tactically at the player characters, because also during the adventure, there are circumstances where if any of Velthrum's henchmen escape any of the previous conflicts, they're going to go back and report to Velthrum that someone has interfered with the successful performance of these rituals. And also, Velthrum will know who these heroes are, because safely returning the noble daughter home, he will obviously know that these heroes helped her survive the sacrificial ritual that was supposed to be the second ritual. So that is some of my ideas behind how you can have a successful mystery or conspiracy in your game. And just to let you know what some of the clues were before we wrap up here, at the first ritual that the heroes in the mini campaign thwarted, I was very transparent, and I suggest that you be incredibly transparent with your clues. The player characters at the site of the first ritual, they were successful at thwarting the first ritual, and they found correspondence between Velthrum and the wizard who was heading up the first ritual. So I was very transparent that there was a conspiracy going on, because the heroes found correspondence between this location and someone else. So it's incredibly transparent. Hey guys, there is a conspiracy going on here, because there are two parties talking about the multiple rituals that have to be performed for this demon to be summoned into the world. The second clue that I gave the player characters is the wizard who headed up the first ritual had a ring that allowed someone else to siphon life from him. And so if the player characters were able to successfully identify the ring, which they were, they would know that the wizard who headed up the first ritual is not the head of the conspiracy, because someone else is bonded with him with a ring that allows them to siphon life from him. So it couldn't get any more transparent that there was a conspiracy afoot, and that this first ritual did not have the head conspirator was not involved in the first ritual, at least physically being there to make sure that it went off successfully. A couple of other clues that I gave was when one of the player characters questioned the peasant father of the child that needed to be sacrificed. The peasant father was very clear on the fact that the only reason he pursued the noble daughter and had this relationship and gave birth father to child is because of the creepy wizard that works for her father, and actually the wizard gave him a love potion. So that was another clue that there was someone who had a hand in driving this conspiracy forward. So my last tip is that if you're going to have a conspiracy, again, I'll go over all of my tips here for you. None of the clues should prevent the adventure from moving forward. If you can set up a conspiracy, have the fallout of the conspiracy be the thing that is driving the players forward. So if you give them clues, make the clues as transparent as possible, and have it so that the clues have some other function in the conspiracy other than the conspiracy being driven forward. Because what's going to drive that conspiracy forward is the fallout from the conspiracy happening. And then be like I said, extremely transparent with your clues. And if you can set it up so that the conspiracy matters, because as I said in my mini campaign, what made the conspiracy matter, or the clues matter, is that if the player characters wanted to suss out the clues and wanted to deal with them, the reward they would get would be knowing who the ultimate bad guy was when they finally come across him at the end of the adventure. So that is what I did. Like I said, there definitely are other videos out there that give you best practices around running conspiracies or mysteries in your game. Please check those out. But I think that this campaign was really successful, though at the end of the campaign, 2 of the 3 heroes in the party died, which I'm not an adversarial kill everybody GM, so that made me a little sad. But overall, I think that the conspiracy was successfully handled. It was a successful mini campaign overall, because at no point were the player characters stymied because they couldn't figure anything out, because the fallout of the conspiracy drove them forward. So it was successful in that way, but I'm not happy that player characters died in my game. But that is definitely always a threat, because I don't like to play consequence-free role-playing. But thanks for checking out this video. I hope that helps you out. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you are watching this video. Talk to you later.